Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, December 19th, 2024. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israeli troops kill civilians and count them as terrorists. So Israeli soldiers stationed in the Netzarim corridor in the Gaza Strip regularly shoot and kill Palestinian civilians, but count them as terrorists. And this was reported by Haaretz on Wednesday, the Israeli newspaper, and they cited testimony from Israeli commanders and other soldiers that were stationed in the Netzarim corridor, which is a strip of land that separates northern Gaza from the rest of the Gaza Strip, where Israeli troops have demolished virtually every building that was there and established military outposts. The Haaretz report says the IDF has designated the area as a kill zone, meaning any Palestinians who try to cross a certain line are shot and killed even if they are unarmed. So a commander in the IDF's Division 252 told Haaretz, quote, "The forces in the field call it the line of dead bodies. After shootings, bodies are not collected, attracting packs of dogs who come to eat them. In Gaza, people know that wherever you see these dogs, that's where you must not go," end quote. A recently discharged Division 252 officer said, quote, "For the division, the kill zone extends as far as a sniper can see. We're killing civilians there who are then counted as terrorists," end quote. So again, this is a Israeli officer who is just in Gaza saying we're killing civilians there who are counted as terrorists. The officer said Israeli units compete to see how many people they can kill. He said, quote, "The IDF spokesperson's announcements about casualty numbers have turned this into a competition between units. If Division 99 kills 150 people, the next unit aims for 200, end quote. In one instance, Israeli troops massacred 200 Palestinians and only 10 were confirmed as being known Hamas operatives. But the IDF announced that they were all militants. And one officer said, quote, "No one questioned the public announcement about killing hundreds of militants," end quote. So one soldier, described as a veteran of this division, recounted a time when the unit killed a boy that he estimated was only 16 years old. He said, quote, "One time guards spotted someone approaching from the south. We responded as if it was a large militant raid. We took positions and just opened fire. I'm talking about dozens of bullets, maybe more. For about a minute or two, we just kept shooting at the body. People around me were shooting and laughing," end quote. The soldier said that when it became clear the boy was not a Hamas militant, the battalion commander still congratulated them for killing a terrorist and said he hoped that they would kill more. The soldier said, quote, "When someone pointed out he was unarmed and looked like a civilian, everyone shouted him down. The commander said, 'Anyone crossing the line is a terrorist, no exceptions, no civilians. Everyone's a terrorist. This deeply troubled me,' end quote. In another instance, a soldier described witnessing 4 unarmed Palestinians being shot at by an Israeli tank, and only one survived. The soldier said, quote, "We put him in a cage set up near our position, stripped off his clothes, and left him there. Soldiers passing by spat on him. It was disgusting. Finally, a military interrogator came, questioned him briefly while holding a gun to his head, then ordered his release," end quote. The soldier said the 3 unarmed Palestinians who were killed were buried by IDF bulldozers. He said, quote, "I don't know if anyone remembers they're there," end quote. So that gets into the issue of the death toll. And we've seen videos of this. I mean, there was a video Al Jazeera obtained, I remember, of Palestinians walking unarmed on the beach. Israeli soldiers shoot and kill them, and then the bulldozers come up and just throw sand over them. When we always say, and when we talk about the death toll, From the health ministry, it does not include the number of dead and wounded who are missing under the rubble, or dead people who are just buried like this. So this report from Haaretz is the latest piece of evidence that Israeli soldiers on the ground in Gaza are purposely killing civilians. Earlier this year, a report from 972 magazine cited Israeli soldiers who detailed how Israeli soldiers routinely executed Palestinian civilians simply because they entered an area that the military defined as a no-go zone. American doctors and nurses who have volunteered in Gaza have reported seeing many children with gunshot wounds to the head and the chest. 99 American healthcare workers said in an open letter to President Biden, quote, "Every one of us who worked in an emergency intensive care or surgical setting treated preteen children who were shot in the head or chest on a regular or even daily basis," end quote. So again, more evidence. And this is separate from airstrikes. This is Israeli troops on the ground shooting Palestinian civilians, Palestinian children, purposely. All right, so the next one here, Israeli attacks in Gaza kill 38 more Palestinians over 24 hours. Gaza's health ministry said Wednesday that Israeli attacks killed at least 38 Palestinians and wounded 203 as the daily U.S.-backed slaughter continues. The ministry's figures are based on the number of dead and wounded Palestinians that are brought to hospitals and don't account for those missing under the rubble or in areas that rescuers are unable to access. Israeli strikes on Wednesday included attacks on the Kamal Adwan Hospital in Beit Lahia, northern Gaza, and this hospital has come under repeated attacks since Israel placed the city under a total siege in early October as part of this ethnic cleansing campaign known as the General's Plan. And the General's Plan, the idea is to move all the Palestinian civilians in northern Gaza south of that Netzrim corridor. So then once they get down there, it's just a wall of death that they cannot cross to get back to northern Gaza. This picture you see is a wounded young Palestinian girl. This is in the Kamal Adwan Hospital. This is the hospital that's been under these constant attacks. Dr. Hussam Abu Safia, the director of the hospital, said overnight Israeli attacks caused the fire and put the ICU out of service. And there's reports that say there's been 60 days of constant attacks on the hospital. The World Health Organization said Wednesday that Israel blocked an international medical team from going to Kamal Adwan. And aid that was meant for the hospital was delivered instead to the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza City. Israeli strikes also pounded targets elsewhere in Gaza in Beit Hanun, another city that's been under a total siege since early October. At least 4 Palestinians were killed by Israeli strikes. In central Gaza, at least 2 Palestinians were killed by Israeli attacks on the Nuseirat refugee camp, and another 2 were killed in the city of Deir el-Balah. Gaza's health ministry said the latest violence brought its death toll to 45,097 and the number of wounded to 107,244. Again, doesn't include people missing under the rubble or indirect deaths caused by the Israeli siege. All right, so the next one here. Democrats call for the U.S. to cut weapons transfers to Israel. This article is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. A group of Democratic lawmakers sent a letter to Secretary of State Antony Blinken demanding the administration follow through with threats to cut weapons transfers to Israel if Tel Aviv did not allow more aid into the Gaza Strip. Since early October, northern Gaza has been under a total siege and deprived of nearly all aid deliveries. The letter, led by Representative Greg Kasar, Democrat from Texas, and Summer Lee, Democrat from Pennsylvania, said that the White House must cut offensive weapon sales to Israel. It says, quote, "Simply put, the Netanyahu government has not complied with the United States' repeated requests to allow humanitarian aid to be delivered safely to innocent people. Under U.S. law, the United States government must suspend offensive weapons to any nation that fails to meet this basic standard." End quote. So a total of 20 Democrats signed on to this letter. And, you know, it's something I think we will see when Trump comes in. There's going to be more Democratic opposition to supporting Israel, to supporting these atrocities in Gaza, because it'll be politically convenient for them. You know, I mean, which is really shameful that they won't speak out about it now. But at least, we probably will see more pressure from the Democrats on this. The Republicans, with the exception, really, I mean, in Congress, with the sole exception of Thomas Massie, all the Republicans are completely on board with helping Israel massacre Palestinian children. Even under Biden, there's been some opposition from the Democrats, but again, it's just shameful that we're going to probably see this, notice a change once Trump comes in, and we'll see more of them speaking out about it. So hopefully some of this pressure makes a difference. I'm going to keep track of all the legislation. If there is, I know there's going to be an effort from some lobby groups to really push for legislation, votes to end aid, to block certain weapon shipments. So I'll try to keep a good eye on that, so we can call our senators, our House representatives, to get them to try to get them to support these things. All right, so the next one here, why a U.S. State Department worker resigned over Israel-Gaza policy. This article is from The Guardian, and it's about a guy named Mike Casey who worked in the State Department, and his job was solely focused on Gaza, and this was even before last year. I believe he ended up in this role in 2020, and essentially he prepared daily reports about the situation in Gaza. And this is what he said, his reason for resigning. He resigned back in July. He did it quietly. It wasn't a big public resignation. He said, quote, "I got so tired of writing about dead kids, just constantly having to prove to Washington that these children actually died, and then watching nothing happen," end quote. Casey's work function included documenting the humanitarian and political landscape through classified cables, research, and reporting, but his disillusionment wasn't sudden. It was a slow accumulation of bureaucratic betrayals, each report dismissed, each humanitarian concern bulldozed by political expediency. He said, quote, "We would write daily updates on Gaza," end quote. That was a short quote, sorry. He said colleagues used to joke. He said that they could attach cash to the reports and still nobody would read them. And he said he was taken aback when Biden questioned the death toll coming from the health ministry, because he's writing these reports using those numbers because he thinks they're credible. And then Biden publicly questions them, as a way to downplay the horror that is happening inside Gaza. And, I can relate with what he says here, being tired of writing about dead kids. And I can't imagine writing about dead kids for the people who are killing them, and then they just do nothing about it. All right, so the next one here, Turkey and allies attack Syrian Kurds, dozens killed. This article is from Jason Ditz. So on Tuesday, the U.S. State Department announced the extension of the ceasefire between Syria's Kurdish SDF and Turkey's allies. The initial ceasefire expired, but the new one was supposed to continue to the end of the week. It doesn't seem to have lasted even a whole day, however, with Turkey and their allies carrying out multiple attacks against Kurdish forces in and around the northern city of Kobani and the town of Manbij. Heavy fighting has been reported around Manbij, with at least 21 pro-Turkish fighters reported killed and an unspecified number of SDF members and affiliates with the Manbij Military Council also killed in the clashes. So seems like some heavy fighting was happening here, and Turkey was said to have provided air support for the attack and artillery fire. And Turkey is also amassing troops along the Aleppo border, so this fighting could increase even more. Turkey's direct involvement in violating the ceasefire has been substantial. In addition to backing and participating in the Manbij fighting with air support, Turkish drones reportedly attacked Kobani FM, a Kurdish radio station in Kobani. The radio station was damaged, but there was no casualties in the strike. So things are pretty hairy up there in northern Gaza. And again, this SDF, this is the U.S.-backed force. This is the U.S.'s allies in Syria fighting against the U.S.'s NATO ally, Turkey. Again, just a great argument for why the U.S. should withdraw and not be involved in this mess. All right, so the next one here, Netanyahu orders occupation of Mount Hermon until the end of 2025. So according to Israel's Channel 12, Netanyahu has ordered the Israeli military to occupy territory it captured on Mount Hermon in Syria following the downfall of Assad until at least the end of 2025. So they're preparing to stay there till the end of 2025 for a year. That's a long time. Usually when Israel does something like that, they don't end up giving the territory back. After Assad fled Syria on December 8th, Israel invaded southern Syria. They took control of this buffer zone, separating the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights from the rest of Syria's territory. They've also gone further in and taken more territory. And so this Channel 12 report said that at least year-long occupation of southern Syria is significant because it essentially opens up a new front for the Israeli Defense Forces. Netanyahu visited Israeli troops on the mountain on Tuesday, which I covered yesterday. He said that the occupation would continue until there was a new arrangement that was made. And they're also expanding settlements in the Golan Heights, in the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. As far as I understand it, that settlement plan just applies to the territory that they occupied before December 8th, before the regime change in Syria. But, you never know. You could see settlements popping up on the other side as well. All right, so the next one here, the UK suggests sending military trainers to Ukraine. So British Defense Minister John Healey has suggested that the UK could send troops to Ukraine for a training mission. During a visit to Ukraine, Healey told The Times that the UK would work to improve its training of Ukrainian troops and would not rule out sending trainers to Ukraine. He said, quote, "We need to make it easier to the Ukrainians to access, and we need to work with the Ukrainians to help them motivate and mobilize more recruits," end quote. When he was asked if that could involve the UK sending troops to Ukraine, Healey said, quote, "We will look wherever we can to respond to what the Ukrainians want. They are the ones fighting," end quote. So Russia has warned against Western countries sending troops for training to Ukraine, saying that they would be legitimate targets. France was really keen on the idea for a while, but then they backed down. But the important context here is that there are British soldiers in Ukraine, but these are small deployments, covert deployments, unofficial deployments. But as far as we know from the information we have, out of all the NATO countries, the UK has had the most troops in Ukraine out of all the NATO countries. So earlier this year, there was a German military leak that revealed the British soldiers are in Ukraine helping fire the Storm Shadow missiles, which recently began striking targets inside Russian territory, inside the Russian mainland. They were striking Crimea for a while before that, but this is why, part of the reason why this is such a big escalation, these long-range strikes on Russia, because it requires direct support from either the US or the UK. And then the Discord leaks that came out last year, they revealed that as of March 2023, there was 97 NATO Special Operations soldiers inside Ukraine, and that included 50 British soldiers. So they were by far the biggest contingent. The US had like 13 or so. So 50 British soldiers then. And then in April 2022, just a couple months after the invasion, The Times reported that British Special Air Service soldiers were in Ukraine training Ukrainians on anti-tank weapons. So the UK has been very involved. And of course, their intelligence, I'm sure MI6 is, I'm sure Ukraine is crawling with British spies, just like it's crawling with CIA. All right, so the next one here, Zelensky admits that Ukraine cannot drive Russia out of Crimea and the Donbas. Zelensky has conceded that Ukraine does not have the ability to drive Russian forces out of the territory Russia has captured since the 2022 invasion, as well as Crimea, which Russia has controlled since 2014. Zelensky told a French newspaper, quote, "We cannot give up our territories. The Ukrainian constitution forbids us to do so. De facto, these territories are now controlled by the Russians. We do not have the strength to recover them. We can only count on diplomatic pressure from the international community to force Putin to sit down at the negotiating table," end quote. So Zelensky previously has maintained, this is kind of a shift for him to hear him say this. His previous position was, this peace formula he would push, and that said, there could be no peace talks until Russian troops are driven out or withdraw from the territory they've captured in Ukraine and Crimea. So just not a realistic path to peace. So we're seeing some concessions here from him. His language has changed recently. He's acknowledged that he's going to have to sign some sort of deal with Russia. The real shame of this and what should be one of the biggest scandals of the Biden administration was the fact that the U.S. and NATO discouraged these peace talks that happened early on in the invasion in March and April 2022. We have confirmation from all sides now that there was a deal on the table, and essentially the broad strokes were Russia would withdraw from the territory that it captured after the February 2022 invasion. And, the areas of the Donbas and Crimea, the Donbas where you have the separatists, and then in Crimea, they would be kind of worked out at a later date. But again, the broad stroke is Russia would withdraw in exchange for Ukrainian neutrality. There were other details, but even the Ukrainian side, their negotiator said last year that the main thing was that Russia wanted was neutrality. And the U.S. and NATO and infamously Boris Johnson told Ukraine not to sign this deal and offered them all this money to fund the war. People can say, oh, the Ukrainians had, they couldn't trust the Russians. They had plenty of their own reasons why not to sign the deal. And I'm sure that that's true. But if they did not have NATO and the U.S. whispering in their ear and saying, hey, we're going to fund this war, we're going to give you all these weapons, fight, 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 they would have been a lot more likely to sign this deal. And then they wouldn't have lost all this territory, which now they're not going to get back. So again, the fact that the U.S. essentially pushed for this war to continue should be the biggest scandal of the Biden administration, that and the genocide in Gaza, of course. All right. So the next one, and I just want to mention, talking about the territory. So you have the 4 oblasts, Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporozhye. And Russia annexed them later in 2022 after the peace talks fell apart. It was like fall of 2022 that Russia declared they annexed them and that they consider them Russian territory. And Putin's conditions for peace that he's outlined is for Ukraine to withdraw from these oblasts, the territory that they control. So you see, Russia's getting some territory out of this. That's clearly their position. All right, so the next one here, the Senate passes the massive $895 billion National Defense Authorization Act. So this is the NDAA that the Senate passed on Wednesday. The House passed this mammoth bill last week, and it now heads to President Biden's desk for his signature. The spending bill passed the Senate in a vote of 85-14, easily getting the 60 votes that it needed. And the NDAA primarily funds the Pentagon and includes some spending for other government agencies' military programs, including the Energy Department's nuclear weapons program. While the NDAA is massive, it does not nearly account for the total U.S. military-related spending. I put in this graph, this table from Winslow Wheeler again. He's a veteran defense analyst, and he puts together this great table detailing all different types of military-related, national security-related spending to get the big picture of what this really costs. And he includes, the Department of Veterans Affairs, Homeland Security, other military-related spending. And let's see what we got here. The total for this, based on this $895 billion request, he says the total is $1.766 trillion that the U.S. will end up spending. That's an estimate, and that doesn't include what we might see, these emergency supplemental funding packages like earlier this year. Biden signed off on that $95 billion foreign military aid bill. There's things like that are going to be added to this total. All right, so the next one here, Supreme Court agrees to review TikTok ban. So this is good news here. The Supreme Court has agreed to review the TikTok ban, and they're doing this they're moving pretty quickly on this. So under this law that was passed, TikTok will be banned in the US, will be removed from, app stores and things like that if the Chinese company that owns it, ByteDance, does not divest by January 19th. The Supreme Court is going to review the argument against this law on January 10th. And they're going to review whether or not it violates freedom of speech, the First Amendment, which it certainly does. This is a very dangerous precedent if this happens. This gives the U.S. government the ability to just shut down a platform, a huge platform like this that 170 million Americans apparently use. It's just a crazy number. So I think they're going to strike it down. I mean, based on the Supreme Court's record with stuff like this, and I think that it looks like they want to do it before the deadline. So, because they're hearing this argument, that doesn't mean that they're going to make any kind of ruling. But I think the fact that they're doing this so quick, I think it's a good sign. And so, yeah, they didn't prove its allegations that it's a national security risk, but the federal government has not proved anything related to that. So it just, absolutely should not be banned. As much as I dislike TikTok, well, we started a TikTok. I dislike using it. I go on there and I just feel old. But we did start an antiwar.com TikTok. We have like 20 followers now, so go follow us over there. And then the last story here, CIA employee facing Espionage Act charges kept in jail. This article is from Chip Gibbons at The Dissenter, which is Kevin Gostela's great website. So on December 11th, 5 days after Magistrate Judge Ivan Davis ordered accused CIA leaker Asif Williams Rahman to be released from jail, District Judge Patricia Tolliver Giles overruled the decision. So Rahman is the CIA employee that has been accused of leaking Israel's plans to attack Iran. If you remember, that came out when Israel was planning to attack. There's reports claiming that it delayed Israel's attack. And so he's pled not guilty. They're targeting him with the Espionage Act. And he's pled not guilty. But that's the allegation, is that he was the leaker. And so I didn't realize, because I saw the news that he was ordered to stay in jail. But apparently this is the first time that a defendant charged under Section 793 of the Espionage Act has been ordered to be detained before trial. Defense attorneys have pledged to appeal this unprecedented move. So it's kind of a weird situation here. And so we'll see what happens with this case. But again, this is the one, it was like leaked to a Telegram channel. I think it was called the Middle East Monitor. And it was about the U.S.'s surveillance of Israel preparing for an attack on Iran, what kind of weapons that they were testing and everything. So we'll try to follow this case. And again, the Dissenter is a great site for like whistleblowing stuff. And they break it down easily, because some of this legal stuff confuses me, but they always do a good job. All right, so that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our Viewpoints, one from David Stockman, Syria, a case of the Empire First folly in spades, one from Colonel Douglas McGregor and James Carden, Iran, America's next war of choice, one from Gideon Levy, Syria's fragile hope is being battered by Israel's campaign of destruction, one from Ted Snyder, sometimes it's hard to understand Volodymyr Zelensky, and one from Alan McLeod over at, where's he writing this? Oh, at Consortium News. Originally at Mint Press News, but this is about Jelani, how the West rebranded Al-Qaeda's Jelani. So please go check that out. Go look at our blog. Go to defendtheguard.us. You see that we have the ad here if you want to volunteer for phone banking for Defend the Guard, something if you want to get involved in anti-war activism. Defend the Guard is very important. It's state-level legislation that would prohibit the federal government from deploying the state's National Guard to a war zone. They send the National Guard to Syria, Iraq, Somalia. It would really hurt the federal government's ability to wage war if states started turning Defend the Guard into law. Also, buy Scott Horton's book, Provoked. We have great ads at antiwar.com. We don't clutter you with ads, and the ads that we do have are for very good things. So anyway, that is it for me for today. A reminder, next week I'm taking Christmas Eve and Christmas off. If anything major happens, we'll update the page. But so there's going to be 3 shows. I think the way it's going to work is I'm going to do 2 shows and then 2-day break and then 1 show to end the week. So anyway, let's hope. I mean, there's some progress with some kind of ceasefire somewhere in Gaza or Ukraine. That is it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.